It is an interesting development that European leaders have been making a deliberate effort to initiate talks with China. You can see this happening with the visits of the German Chancellor and Spanish Prime Minister to China recently, and now the French President and European Commission Chief joining in. It's definitely a noticeable shift, especially when you compare it to the worsening diplomatic relations between the United States and China. Remember when the US Secretary of the State bailed on his trip to China earlier this year because of the whole spy balloon thing? Anyway, when the French President and the European Commission Chief went to visit China, they urged China to take additional measures to end the ongoing Ukraine conflict. They also tried to smooth over the trade relationship between the EU and China, which is a pretty big deal since China is Europe's biggest trade partner. It looks like China is trying to use France to drive a wedge between Europe and the United States. We saw a tinge of it when the French President asked Europe to steer clear of the US strategies and tactics. If anyone's happy about that statement, it is China. China is really trying to keep things cool with the European Union, and it thinks France to be a good partner for that. France is basically down to chat with anyone, even Russia, which makes it even more attractive to China because China can use France to drive a wedge between Europe and the US when it comes to dealing with China. France is all about this idea of strategic autonomy, which means it does not pick sides, does not align with any particular group, and just does what's best for it. And that's what China likes, because this means Europe's independence from the United States, which means a softer approach towards China. We have heard statements from France before that the United States wants to confront China, whereas the European Union wants to engage China. In fact, France perceives Australia receiving submarines under the AUKUS agreement as a sign that the United States is prioritizing military conflict. The Russia-Ukraine war actually brought the US and Europe closer together, and NATO got a boost from it. But it also made China and Russia closer, and the US is scrambling to fix things up. The US is worried about China selling weapons to Russia and letting Chinese tech companies have free rein in Europe. Some American efforts have yielded positive outcomes. Like some places in Europe are not allowed to have TikTok on government phones because it's owned by China. And the Netherlands is now restricting the export of fancy tech equipment to China due to American influence. As the United States is adopting a more forceful approach to challenge China's geopolitical and military power, China would do everything to prevent the European Union from slipping deeper into the sway of the United States. China sees the US as its biggest enemy, so it is trying to create divisions within the transatlantic alliance. The US knows China and Russia are threats, so get ready to hear a lot about democracy versus authoritarianism narrative. It is true that in the past few years, European leaders have become more and more skeptical about China. They are not happy with how China has handled the pandemic, its treatment of protesters in Hong Kong, and Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang. Plus, China's been flexing its muscles with Taiwan. While the West put sanctions on Russia, China remained the only major economy willing to maintain and enhance trade relations with Russia. This got European officials talking about how to punish China without completely cutting them off. Despite of attempts by Europe, it is unlikely that China will turn against Russia. With the way things are going, it looks like the ones who used to divide and conquer are now getting a taste of their own medicine.